or no?
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
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 How are you?
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Hi. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Oh, well, I guess we're still waiting. Okay.
Yes. While we're waiting, I just want to tell you, ladies, this is my favorite day of the week, and I especially enjoy when you two add some input to the class. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very nice.
So I just wanted to say that.
Nice of you to say.
I know I really do.
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Okay. So we have to talk about the Megillah, the story of Esther. Too much to do. More two sittings. But the good news is that we won't run out of things to talk about. The Megillah starts with Achashverosh, and it tells us that this story happened in the days of Achashverosh, and he was Achashverosh. There's a lot of serious and not so serious comments about that statement. It actually says he was the Achashverosh that ruled from Hodu until Kush, 127 provinces. But Rashi says, Chazal tell us, he was Achashverosh. That means he was consistent in his wickedness from beginning until the end. And if you want more information on that, there's various targums on the Megillah. The targum is an Aramaic translation. There's one on the Torah. Every week when we read the portion of the week, there's a practice to read in Hebrew and the Aramaic targum, and it's a pretty straightforward translation. In most cases, it's verbatim, word for word translation, some modifications, some additions. But there are other targums, like the ones we have in the Megillah, that are almost like entire additional books. They're filled with material. It's hard to even call it a translation. For example, there's two targums here in this version. The first one says, the way it translates the first sentence is, this was in the days of Achashverosh, in whose days the work on the great temple ceased until the second year of King Darius. Because of the counsel of the wicked Vashti, the daughter of El-Merodach, who was the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. And because she did not allow the building of the temple, it was decreed upon her that she would be killed. And he too, for listening to her advice, had his days shortened and his kingdom divided, because he was originally the ruler of all nations and tongues. They were all beneath his dominion, but at this point they no longer were subservient to him. And afterwards it was revealed to Hashem that Vashti was destined to be killed, and Esther would sit on the throne, because she was the daughter of Sarah, who lived for 127 years. Achashverosh was given an extension, and he ruled from Hodu until Kush, from the east of the great India until the west of Kush, which is 127 provinces. Anyways, there's a lot of information there. That's a lot of background, but it tells you that the story begins before. There's a lot of backstory that we have to know to understand the different characters and who they are. The other Targum says that the days of Achashverosh, one of the 10 world rulers, ruled over the world. The first of all is the King of all kings, God himself, whose kingdom shall speedily be revealed upon us. The second one was Nimrod, I'd mentioned at the very beginning of the Torah. The third one was Pharaoh, king of Egypt. The fourth one was the kingdom of Israel. The fifth one was Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylonians. The Babylonians were the ones who destroyed the first temple. The sixth one was Achashverosh, the Persian Empire. The seventh one was Greeks. The eighth was Rome. The ninth is Mashiach ben David. And the 10th is the King of Kings, Hashem, once again. Anyways, again, there's a lot more information, but that gives you a sense of the context of history here. And that's important. Again, first we need to know that there's a lot of backstory involved in characters. Achashverosh had a role, Vashti had a role, Haman had a role. All of these people came in with a history behind them, which is why they were put in certain positions and played certain roles in the story. It's almost as though we talk about central casting. Someone wants to make a movie, they look at all the different actors who are auditioning for the parts, and they choose the ones who are most suited to play a particular role. It's almost as though Hashem took a whole cast of characters and said, who's going to be the king, who's going to be the queen, which one will be the villain, who will be the hero, etc. In a certain sense, that point is made in other contexts as well. We talk about Hashem. There is some background noise It may be that somebody has the speakerphone on, or simply needs to mute their microphone. So if whoever can do that, that would be a benefit to everyone. You can figure out where it's coming from.
Rabbi Grossman, this is Lawrence Cohen. I'm going outside.
Okay.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Okay.
I think that's
Thank you. Okay, so
thank you.
okay.
Is that
about the story of much better. The story of the Exodus from Egypt, where Hashem decreed, gave a prophecy to Abraham about how then the oppressors will be punished and your children will be freed and brought into the promised land. But Hashem didn't say which nation would be the one that would be the oppressors, or what country it would be. So it turned out to be Egypt. Egypt was the one that ended up suffering the brunt of the 10 plagues. So the question is, why were the Egyptians held accountable for simply fulfilling a prophecy that had been fulfilled? One way to approach that question philosophically, but one basic point that is made is, look, God didn't say who was going to be the oppressors, and anyone could have tried out for the job. They chose to play that role, so it's their responsibility for choosing to be in that role. And what to me, I guess, interesting, what's particularly striking is the character of King Ahasuerus that we're told. King Ahasuerus, the one that was consistent in his wickedness from beginning to end, is one of those things. There's innumerable things that are not obvious from the text, and we can only understand by relying on the oral tradition, the Gemara, the Talmud, the Midrash. But I think this is, again, one of them, that there is a perception, of course, Esther is the hero, Haman is the villain, and the king of Ahasuerus, we like to think of him as maybe undergoing a metamorphosis. You know, in a certain sense, he's the interesting character because he starts off, with a wicked queen and with a wicked advisor, and he ends up turning around, and now he has a wonderful queen and a wonderful advisor, is Esther and Mordechai. But the truth is, we're told he was consistently wicked from beginning to end. He really doesn't change. So, if he doesn't change, then what is the message of Ahasuerus' role and character in the Megillah? And I think the answer is something which resonates, in all times, and not any less today than it did. That there are many things about the story of the Megillah that are very different, and almost the idea of an absolute monarch, and the idea of the way society was structured in those days. Person gets their head chopped off for walking into the king's room unannounced. These are things that are hard to relate to. But the idea that Ahasuerus is a man with great power, and he's very wicked, and yet he can be, at one moment, a mortal danger to the Jewish people of passing a law that they should be exterminated, and then in the course of one day, he turns on a dime, and suddenly he's the great friend and protector of the Jewish people. But this is because he changed. So then what changed? The real turning point and the real driver, the engine of the events in the Megillah, is something which is mentioned, although it's not one of the most famous and iconic parts of the story, but it's the most important part of the story. It's when Esther tells Mordechai that I will do as you say, I will go to the king and intercede, but I want you and everyone else to fast and pray for 3 days. And if you read the Midrash again and you read the Talmud, you find out that was really where all the action happened, and that was really where all the wheels turned. When it says in the Megillah that night the king couldn't sleep, and we know the king was tossing and turning in bed, and they read to him the book of records, and he found out that Mordechai had been a protector and friend of the king, and there's an attitude shift. Now all of a sudden Mordechai needs to be honored, but we're told that when it says the king couldn't sleep, there's an illusion that on a deeper level is as if God himself couldn't sleep. That's metaphoric, obviously, but as if God himself was awakened by these events, and it wasn't because of any book of records, but it was because of the prayers of all the men and women, and particularly the children, whose pure speech had the desired effect, and that was really what turned things around. So the message of the story is that there are wicked people like Haman, there are good people like Mordechai and Esther, and it is a story of the good guys beating the bad guys. But then there are people like Achashverosh who is equally wicked, but he serves as a tool. He's just a puppet. When the Jewish people are off their game, so to speak, when they've strayed from the proper path, when they're not living up to their potential, they need to be taught a lesson. Achashverosh becomes manipulated perhaps by Haman, but really manipulated by heavenly decree, and he becomes a terrible danger. And when the Jews do the right thing and they recognize where they need to rectify, then Esther steps in, and all of a sudden the king is completely different. Because the king ultimately doesn't matter. Achashverosh is one of the most frightening figures. Again, if you read about and you just visualize what society was like in those days, you could not walk into his room without getting your head chopped off. And you see he manages to kill his wife, his advisor, in the course of the story. No one's safe around him. And yet ultimately he has no power at all. He is as much a subject to forces beyond his control as anyone. And the very fact that he does kill his first queen, one might think of that as an example of how the kings in those days were all powerful, and this king had the ability to execute anyone at will, including the queen. But the truth is, he was trapped by his own personality, by his own mood. And I think the Believable Gaon says that. He said, as we saw an allusion to in the Targum, Vashti was a wicked person who had it coming to her, and the king was a wicked person who had it coming to him. So you think, what does God do to punish a wicked king? Sometimes he does what we find in Egypt. He overturns the laws of nature and sends 10 devastating plagues to destroy the country. Other times, he simply pushes the king's buttons, and with a silly marital spat, the king makes an unreasonable request. The queen gives a disrespectful response, and the king, he even calls his advisors, hoping that they can sort of give him a way out of his predicament, and instead they give him the wrong advice, and he ends up killing the queen. So who's really in control, and who's really not in control? So the all-powerful Achashverosh is ultimately powerless. He's subject to his own moods, and he can't even control them. And this is really the lesson. That's why it resonates so much with us today. We put so much stock. It's human nature to put stock in all kinds of things. It's almost as if we're designed to place our trust in something, to turn to some kind of power. Sometimes we think it's ourselves, but deep down inside, no one's ever really confident they can rely on themselves. So we turn to other things. It says Haman was the ultimate arrogant person. He wanted everyone to bow to him, and if one person didn't bow to him, he decided that would be grounds to exterminate the person's entire nation. And it says that Haman wore an idol around his neck, so that when he passed people in the street and they bowed to him, they were also bowing to his idol. So, why does a person who's so arrogant need an idol? The answer is people always need. Arrogance is the greatest form of insecurity. People want something to rely on. So Haman also has his idols. The difference is that the idol is really self-serving. The person wants to put the idol on a pedestal and worship it, and the idol allows the person to indulge in their own whims and their own desires. Ultimately, idolatry is the greatest form of slavery, because the person is not free. The person is subject to their own ego and their own human weaknesses, and the idol is there to give a stamp of approval. And thus, we see that the villains of the Megillah are basically people who can't control their anger, can't control their pride, and they're very powerful and very threatening. Ultimately, they do themselves in their own. And that's, I imagine, part of the story as well. There's a concept like that God has so designed the world that evil ends up self-destructing. You see that with Haman, who yes, there's the story of the miracle of Purim is all about the many coincidences and twists and turns, but part of it certainly is that Haman's own wickedness, his own desire to kill Mordechai ends up rebounding on his own head. His inability to contain his impatience. So he goes to the king and is about to open his mouth to ask the king to hang Mordechai, and the king instead tells him to lead Mordechai through the streets on a horse and show him the greatest honor that's ever been shown to anyone in the kingdom. So these are some of the lessons. So anyway, so that's how the Megillah opens. The Megillah opens with the character of Achashverosh, who's a mighty and powerful king, but really the story shows us how all of the powers that people ascribe to themselves or to others are ultimately simply tools that Hashem uses to orchestrate his plan. The message of Purim, of course, is that of a hidden miracle, hidden behind the screen of things which seem to have independent powers, but really have no power at all. So in a way, again, the story of Purim is sometimes, instinctively we think of it as a lesser miracle because it doesn't have the same drama as splitting the sea or turning the water into blood, but in a certain sense, the whole essence of a miracle is to demonstrate, as we know from the story of Egypt, to demonstrate that behind the screen of nature, God is really hiding all along. There is no such thing as nature because God can change the rules of nature at will, and to be able to perceive that when everything that happens seems to be a natural event. And yet, when you look at the totality of the picture, and that was really the story of Purim, where everything that happened operated within the bounds of nature, and yet it all added up to a miracle. So, it shows us it's almost a more powerful perception, because if we study the story properly and learn the lessons properly, what we're seeing is how even nature itself is transparent and doesn't really, when we look at it, it doesn't really hold water. They say that there was some kind of survey, I can't tell you exactly when, but relatively modern times, that they asked some academics about their level of belief or lack thereof, and it turned out that there was a higher percentage of mathematicians and scientists who believed in God, whereas scholars of other branches of wisdom, like the humanities, were less inclined to believe in God because they felt it was unscientific. The scientists themselves didn't feel that way to the same degree, because nature itself, when you see, it's not as though we don't need to see nature upended to believe in God. If you look at nature properly, Shemayim Rishafim Kol the heavens declare glory of God. Sometimes you talk about the conflict between science and religion. It isn't really that way. Science is going to be only a misunderstanding of science. The harmony and the beauty of creation itself, testament to God's orchestration. So the story of Purim is, in some sense, I think we example. God is substance to nature to demonstrate his presence. He can do it within nature. So this is the story. So you have Achashverosh, the king, going over 127 countries. And again, there's a lot of backstories. Self-contained book. You can open it up and read it, but others tell us that it's a mistake to ignore what happened before this. And that gives us about the 10 kings. It's very interesting. And I'm not sure that it would probably bear some thinking about. It's really, I don't know if the number 10 has a lot of significance to it, and obviously number 1 and number 10. But the point here is to show the totality of history. And it gives us a snapshot of how we view history overall and the place of the story in history. So if you look at the 10 kings, so you have God, that's number 1. The second one is Nimrod. So who's Nimrod? Nimrod is described as, it's in the Torah, it's in the Parshas Noach, so after the flood, and we learn about the 70 nations, the tower, Tower of Babel and the division of man into different languages and cultures and countries, and the 10 generations from Noah until Abraham. And we're introduced to the character of Nimrod, who we're told was a great, powerful hunter, a powerful hunter before God. Not clear exactly who and what he is, but still is kind of malevolent figure in history. So, an evil king who this idea of a powerful hunter before God represents the rebellion against the authority of God himself. He was the one who, the great adversary of Abraham, who was introduced to us as the 10th generation from Noah and the beginning of the great history that becomes our history. We're told that Abraham, discovering the truth of God and beginning to spread that knowledge to other people, comes into conflict with his king Nimrod. King Nimrod commands Abraham to cease and desist from this monotheistic religion, and he tries to throw him into a furnace. He won't comply, and Abraham, of course, does not comply, and Nimrod has him cast into the furnace, and Abraham emerges unharmed, and that's a great miracle of the 10 tests of Abraham. That's Nimrod, so that's the second king, right? The first one who rebels against God. Third king was Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that is the beginning of our history. This is after Abraham is elected for his great mission, and his son Yitzchak, his grandson Yaakov, the 12 tribes. The nation of Israel grows into a nation of Egypt, and they're enslaved by Pharaoh, as Hashem told Abraham in the prophecy, right? Okay. The fourth kingdom is the kingdom of Israel. So that, obviously, we leave Egypt, we get the Torah, we come into the Promised Land, and it's several centuries before Israel even produces a monarchy. But again, we grow into that role. That we pass through as a nation, we have independent. Shaul HaMelech and David HaMelech, King David, the high point, Shlomo HaMelech, the building of the temple, that's the glory, the high watermark of our existence as a nation. And then, of course, things start to unravel. We eventually get the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. That's the fifth kingdom, Babylonians. The sixth one is Achashverosh, the kingdom of the Persians. We know that the Jewish people passed through 4 exiles. The Babylonians are the first one, the Persians are the second one. And when the Persians step into history and take the place of the Babylonians, that's the incident of the handwriting on the wall, where the last Babylonian king sees a vision of a hand that writes on the wall, essentially that their days are numbered. The Persians then defeat them in a war and take over. So the Jews passed from Babylonian domination to Persian domination, and under that authority is the story of Purim that we read. The seventh one is the Greeks, right? Because the Persians are the ones who allowed the Jews. Ultimately, after the story of the Persian king Koresh, Cyrus allows the Jews to rebuild the temple, but they're still under Persian rule. And then Alexander the Great comes with the Greek armies and wipes out the Persians off the map. Now the Jews are under the Greeks, but they never become independent. The eighth one is the Romans, right? The Romans become the next world power. They're the ones who destroyed the second temple. We're still the current, this Western dominated role to Catholic Church, to Christian Europe, to the Western world. This is all the Roman exile that we're in today. The ninth one is Mashiach, that we wait for every day, and the 10th one is Hashem again. So this is the cycle of history. The arc of history passed through all these points. And that's the again, we talk about other empires, other powers. These are the ones that play a role and they consider the central purpose of the Jews in creation. These are the important events, the important monarchs that play a role in our history, and each of these exiles symbolizes something. So that's the place that we're told, especially in the time about the building of the temple, that there had been an attempt to build a temple prior to this story, and the Persian king had given a license for the Jews to go ahead with it. And it was mentioned in the Ashby had a role stopping it. Elsewhere, mentioned Haman had a role stopping it. And the project was put on hold. Like, general context, again, I mentioned Vashti being the daughter of Adon Rodach, Vashti was the last member of the Babylonian monarchy, which had been defeated by the Persians. Vashti became the Persian queen. That's the way it worked in those days. It was also part of the pagan ethos, I guess. Today we think of wars between good guys and bad guys. Back then it was just whoever was stronger wins. If Ahasuerus, not Ahasuerus, the Persian, Giants takes over the Babylonian Empire and destroys them, then the surrounding princess becomes its queen, of course, and she's the queen of the new empire. Why not? That's just the way it works. So, each of these people, Vashti is a remnant of the empire that destroyed the temple the first time around. She is not interested in seeing the temple rebuilt. She considers that part of her heritage, keeping the temple, keeping it destroyed. And Ahasuerus, who complies with the request to stop the building of the temple, is also guilty of that. So the whole thing is that we don't, at least of Ahasuerus, we don't have any context for what the feast is about, but there's no mention. It's clauses for the feast. One was Ahasuerus is Neras to Vashti. Another was that, and this is where the backstory comes in. So that takes place at the end of the present. Things I call it almost the 21, where Jews have been living not uncomfortable necessarily. They were told to settle there because of a while. Prophecy says 70 years. And what worries every monarch is when are the 70 years going to end? Because there was a sense that when the Jews regained power. Now, I'm not sure exactly what it was. The Jews returned to power and destroyed the kingdom, or